I can't believe Trump hasn't taken it down, to tell you the truth. So go find it quick because they are purging stuff like that. They're, censoring the Smithsonian and the National Park System and everything else. But as of right now, I think I checked just a couple days ago, if you Google uncivil religion, you're still going to get the Smithsonian's digital archive of all of this Christian extremism that was just, coursing through the January 6th riot. So Matt Taylor is exactly right. He's done more than anyone to really go even deeper and to follow the faith leaders that were so central to the planning and to the summoning of the mob and the radicalization. But the pictures are pretty powerful evidence.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. I'm your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Bertram. What's going on, Josh?
Hey, what's going on, Will?
Not much. And today we have joining us again, Congressman Jared Huffman. He is a congressman in California's 2nd Congressional District, is also a humanist and the only member of Congress who's publicly said he does not believe in God. In 2018, he founded the Congressional Freethought Caucus, words are hard this morning, with Congressman Jamie Raskin, which is focused on protecting church-state separation and advancing public policy grounded in reason, science, and constitutional principles. And he has a book called No Prophets, The Fight to Save Democracy. Let me find it here so we can show it to the camera. So product placement is very important on the show. There you go.
Like it.
And the book examines the rise of Christian nationalism, the theology driving parts of the movement, its influence inside American government, and all the dangers we should be aware of. So welcome back to the show, Congressman.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna tell you right off the bat. We talk to a lot of Congress people. Not a lot. I mean, I think you're probably like the 3rd or 4th, but we've talked to enough Congress people that I can develop an opinion about Congress in general. And I would say that you are probably one of the nicest and coolest Congress people that we've had on. That's not to take anything away from Jennifer McClellan, who we have on almost every year, because I'm in her district. But yeah, it's just really nice to just see Congress people actually doing things for the people. And this book that you wrote, No Prophets, is probably one of the biggest, public services that we need right now. It's a book that explores a topic that I think is really, really important. And yeah, I'd love for you just to kind of tell us, why did you write this book?
I really appreciate that, Will. Thank you. So this is not like the typical politician book. Usually when a politician writes a book, everybody rolls their eyes and wonders, oh, what higher office are they running for? If I were interested in higher office, this is definitely not the book I would write. This ain't going to get you there. This is just something I have become quite passionate about. And it's because throughout my time in Congress, I have watched this MAGA Christian nationalist movement grow stronger and more militant. And I was there on January 6th when it played such a central and obvious role in the insurrection that tried to topple our government. I thought that would be a wake-up call for the country to finally kind of come to terms with this threat and hold it to account. And it wasn't. The country really went back to sleep. And that is why I decided to write this book, to try to sound the alarm. And there have been lots of books, of course, on the subject of Christian nationalism, but nothing really from inside the U.S. Capitol. And I wanted to take people behind the scenes in ways that you can't really find in any other book, and show them what I see every day, because this threat, this project, is so much further along than most people realize.
Yeah, I would agree with you there and say your book is really important. It's a lot different than the one that our current vice president wrote. But I would say even this could be a book. I'm not wish casting. This could be a book you could run a presidential campaign on, only because this is how important I think the topic is. So what do you say to a person, that says, hey, this congressperson, he doesn't believe in God. Mm-hmm. He's in Congress, right? So he's a politician, and he's trying to tell us about Christianity and all the harms, right? So what would you say to a person that thinks that?
Well, we need to talk because, I am a humanist. I certainly embrace a lot of universal values that are consistent with the core teachings of Christianity, but I don't believe in the supernatural elements of it. Um, but I'm certainly not trashing Christianity or trying to pick a fight with Christians with this book. And I'm gratified that I've got so many great Christian allies in this fight. I think that's probably the best answer to that question is pointing to you guys and the growing number of other devout Christians who are calling out this movement as the dangerous threat that it is, mostly from a faith perspective, because I think my Christian friends are horrified at the way this movement is bastardizing their faith and,
Yes.
departing from the gospel in their view. My view is, I'm rooting for you guys, for the good Christians in that debate. But I think we got to remember it's about more than just a debate over the gospel. This is about our democracy. It's about our basic rights. And we got to build a bigger coalition than that. So, I think the biggest challenge, Will, that your question really speaks to is the awkwardness we have in discussing this intersection between religion and politics in this country. People are very defensive. They're hypersensitive about it. It's awkward as heck. And when someone like me, or even you guys, wades into criticism and scrutiny of a movement that represents itself as Christian, you just get immediate backlash. So it's a big part of why most people just avoid it. They turn away. And if we're going to face this threat that is on a collision course with our democracy, we're going to have to get better at that.
Yeah, I really agree with your words. I actually think they're super compelling. When we think about the intramural, as in between Christian sects, sects, and between right these groups, that is important, but that's not the broader picture. And of course, for someone like me, a pastor, I hate seeing what's happening. I hate seeing the way the gospel is represented. I hate seeing the teachings of my Savior seem to be completely disregarded in some ways, right? So that all hurts me by people who are claiming to follow that same Savior. So all that is a problem. And yet, of course, we also have the greater problem of Jared Huffman, who isn't concerned very much about the inner workings of theological understandings of the gospel. He's more concerned about his basic rights and the rights of his kids and grandkids and the people that come out. Not that I don't know if you have a grandkid or not, but I'm saying like,
Not yet.
I'm not calling you old,
Jared.
Jared. I got gray hair too.
I get the message.
Yeah, but it's like, it's this is super important. It's everybody, and we can get stuck. It's good to remember we can get stuck. Oh, this is just about the gospel, but it's really is about the gospel for us, for Christians, and yet and something else. But for many people, it isn't about the gospel at all. It's about their basic rights. It's about the fear that they're feeling. Am I going to be able to be here? In 10 years, am I going to be able to be allowed to be in America if I'm a Muslim, if I'm part of the LGBTQ community, if I'm any number of things, or if I'm a liberal, okay, whatever it is, right? So we see the fear and we see all that. So that makes a lot of sense. I want to focus in though on this idea of your name. You said no prophet. So specifically, even though we're not talking about, hey, this isn't, you're not trying to argue for the gospel in this book. What you're saying is you're addressing a Christian issue in the sense that there are Christians doing this and the threat of this particular view and interpretation of Christianity. And I want to understand, or especially maybe more accurate, is Christianity's relationship to government and to the social contract that we all have with each other. So I guess my question is, why prophets? Why prophetic? Because when I hear prophet, when I hear prophetic, that brings a specific thing to my mind. Yeah. I definitely have a colored view of what that is. My bias has determined that. And when I hear someone who's a humanist or an atheist say prophet, I'm like, well, what do you mean prophet? What's a prophet for you? Like what does that even work within your worldview? And then of course, I mean, I can already guess that, but then why are you hitting this prophetic thing? Why is this a big deal, this idea of prophecy? Why are we even having a discussion about this in a book from a congressman? I love
Yeah,
to hear
I'm
your
really
thoughts.
glad you asked that question because that title was chosen very purposefully. And the fact that you're thinking about it, and I hope others will too, is exactly what I'm going for here. So here's the thing: you guys know that probably the most virulent faction of the Christian nationalist movement are the independent, charismatic evangelicals led by the New Apostolic Reformation. They're not the only religious subculture in Christian nationalism, but they are militant, they're big, they're powerful. They were all over the January 6th insurrection. And they are led by people who practice this prophetic belief system that God has sort of reconvened the old apostolic order that died out when the last of the disciples left the earth. And that modern day folks like Dutch Sheets and Cindy Jacobs and others have these special spiritual gifts to speak the direct word of God to their millions of followers who are very devoted to the revelations and prophecies that they issue. That concerns me because I grew up in a faith community that embraced prophetic belief. It wasn't the full Pentecostal style stuff, but there was speaking in tongues. There were, people issuing revelations and prophecies. In fact, the LDS movement, I grew up in a branch of the LDS church called the Reorganized Latter-day Saints. It started with a revelation to Joseph Smith from the angel Moroni. So prophecy is very baked in to the LDS movement. And I talk about it as, something that in my experience, could be very invigorating to a faith community. It could really make it feel alive and relevant in the modern day. The idea that God is still talking through people, maybe even through me someday, that's pretty exciting to people of faith. But I've also seen what happens when it goes off the rails. And especially with this prophetic free-for-all of the New Apostolic Reformation, where there's no denominational guardrails, there's no one to excommunicate or do any of this stuff that would keep rogue prophecy from really going to dark places. That's pretty troubling. In the church of my youth, it was not uncommon for people to believe God was talking to them, declare themselves a prophet, and go off and start new churches. It was happening all the time. And, I liken it to like unstable genetic material that sort of invites mutation. A couple of people I grew up with, one of my basketball teammates in high school followed one of these guys who thought God was talking to him and declared himself a prophet. They went off and lived communally in Ohio, and this prophet declared that God wanted a blood sacrifice. He wanted this family to be murdered. And two people I grew up with helped carry out the murder. An innocent family was slaughtered in a barn in an Ohio farmhouse in sort of a cult murder because this inherently volatile prophetic system went off the rails. And it's done it throughout history. It wasn't just like a one-off in my experience. This was David Koresh and the Branch Davidians. This is so many other examples. So when I saw Trump bringing Dutch Sheets and Paula White and all of these other really radical prophetic faith leaders into the White House, taking them out of the fringe and making them mainstream figures, power figures in his administration and in the Republican Party, that alarmed me in a pretty big way. And that's what I was evoking with the title No Prophets.
I love that. One of the things I think I enjoyed talking about with you is that you can talk about the New Apostolic Reformation without like terrifying me like Matt Taylor does when he comes on the show. Every time
he terrifies me.
I'm like, no, you are not
He
fun at party.
terrifies all of us. We're all terrified, Matt.
I know. What I want to hear, because you brought it up, and this isn't one of the questions that I had sent you, but I am curious just about your take about January 6th, because you were there. And we were lucky enough to talk with Harry Dunn not long after January 6th took place. He kind of gave us his perspective from where he was at. You were actually inside. Can you talk to us about like one, what was that like, and then what sort of indications did you have that like either Christian nationalism or the NAR had something to do with what happened?
Well, I saw the appeal to heaven flags, and that's like a telltale sign of the NAR, of course. But there was a lot more than that. The blowing of shofars all over the Capitol. I was hearing it in real time as this thing unfolded. I saw the other symbols and sounds and sights of Christian worship. And there's really not much of a debate about that. I don't know if you folks have seen the digital archive that the Smithsonian put together with the University of Alabama. It's called Uncivil Religion.
Yeah. We spoke with the guys that put it together, Jerome Kapolsky and Matt or Mike. I can't remember the name of the other person.
Everyone should go look at that website, by the way, if they doubt whether or not January 6th had Christian nationalist, Christian overtones. All right,
that was exactly my point, Josh, is that folks should just go look at it, because a picture paints 1,000 words, a video, and they did such a great job in capturing that for the future. I can't believe Trump hasn't taken it down, to tell you the truth. So go find it quick, because they are purging stuff like that. They're censoring the Smithsonian and the National Park System and everything else. But as of right now, I think I checked just a couple days ago, if you Google uncivil religion, you're still going to get the Smithsonian's digital archive of all of this Christian extremism that was just, coursing through the January 6th riot. So Matt Taylor is exactly right. He's done more than anyone to really go even deeper and to follow the faith leaders that were so central to the planning and to the summoning of the mob and the radicalization. But the pictures are pretty powerful evidence.
Yeah, the pictures are very powerful. And, when we're looking at January 6th, right? So we have the pictures, right? And it's almost like people have forgotten January 6th. It's amazing to me. Like you said, it's like this, well, it was reframed. It was reinterpreted, right? By those who said but it wasn't a insurrection.
Right.
It was a protest, or it was a
inside job.
They're doing their duty as citizens, right? It was actually their right as citizens, and all the stuff that goes along those things. And so I want to focus in then on this January 6th and the Christian influence there. And one of the things that from what I understand, the point your book is making is that this was an organized attempt to overthrow the United States government by Christian nationalist ideas, or impede on change the results of a genuine election. But however we want to say that, it was bad, right? So, looking at that, what is it about? Okay, let me make sure I get this question right. Why? Like, how do we know? Okay, here's where I get it. How do we know that it's organized in the sense that you're saying it is? Right? Yeah. How do we know that it wasn't just a bunch of people that were really passionate Christians, okay, misguided, obviously, right, whatever, and then the specific people that went in from the wider group that was there, the people that went in, where do we see that it was not random or emergent or organic, but it was more intentional? Because I think that's part of what I constantly hear is there's just people there doing their,
things got a little carried away, right? Yeah,
they got a little carried away. There's certainly no intention behind it. Make that case for us, for our listeners.
Absolutely. So it was very intentional. And, nobody, I'm here to promote my book, No Prophets, of course, but if you really want to do a deep dive into the intentionality, into the choreography, into the months of organizing and radicalizing that led up to this event, You get Matthew Taylor's book, which is The Violent Take It by Force, and he goes very deeply into all of this. I do to a degree, but not quite as deep a dive as Matthew Taylor, who really brings the receipts in that book. But it's there. It's there in the words and actions and deeds of these NAR figures who were just central to the planning. You know, when we think about January 6th and holding people to account for that insurrection, a lot of people think about, you know, the Willard Hotel and the war room that was set up there with Giuliani and Eastman and other characters. The NAR folks were there too, in the Willard. They were inside the White House in the days immediately leading up to January 6th. Dutch Sheets was tapped by the Trump political team right after the election to start up this nationwide tour, to start radicalizing and mobilizing people around the Stop the Steal big lie. And he issued prophecies about it. So it's pretty overwhelming and compelling. And it's why so many people were disappointed when the Select Committee on January 6th completed its work, issued an 845-page report that was supposed to be the story of what happened that day, and it completely left out Christian nationalism. I talk about in the book how that happened. It was a very deliberate erasure of something that everybody could see with their own eyes. And it happened because one person on the committee, Liz Cheney, just didn't want to upset conservative Christians. And that was a great disservice to this country.
Yeah, I see that, and I understand. I mean, I think that there should have been some mention about the Christian nationalist element of January 6th, because it's because now, I mean, it's 2026 now, right? So, you know, trying to convince people that January 6th had this like oversized proportion of Christian nationalists that were part of it, you know, it's hard to make that argument now, right? Because you're like, well, the J6 committee didn't even mention it, but that's the thing that all of us are sort of like experiencing right now. And I would love to kind of just zero in on something that you mentioned in the book, like Christian privilege, right? So like, is the fact that we didn't talk about it in the January 6th report, the fact that Liz Cheney potentially was concerned about, you know, how Christianity would be viewed, like is that all part of kind of like the Christian privilege? And then maybe just taking that one step further, like, why isn't the media like touching this?
I consider it a form of Christian privilege. And, you know, I don't, again, mean that in a provocative way to attack Christians or Christianity. I just think it's pretty well known that we have a cultural reflex to presume that anything Christian is good. It is the dominant religion and culture, and, you know, has played such a huge role in our history that I think there is that de facto view that something Christian really shouldn't be criticized or questioned. It's a problem. And, you know, I think we're going to have to accept that when something tries to topple your government, tries to install someone as president who lost the election and stop the peaceful transfer of power, when they use violence as a means to that end, looking away and just being genteel and polite about the subject doesn't really work. This is where Christian privilege is a real challenge to confronting this movement. And what Liz Cheney did, by all accounts, by everything I can find from talking to other members of the committee and staff about what went down there, is that she didn't want to offend conservative Christians. So that does speak to this cultural reflex, this Christian privilege challenge. Now, it could have also been that she wanted to run for president. We'll never know. And if I really want to be charitable, because I admire the way Liz Cheney confronted Donald Trump, she was one of the few Republicans who did it at that time. If we really want to be charitable, she probably thought that anything that took away from the singular accountability of Donald Trump for the insurrection was complicating the story in ways that she didn't want to see. She wanted this to be about Trump. But I think others, including Adam Kinzinger, the other Republican on the Select Committee, who is a devout evangelical, he just felt that Christian nationalism was the whole story of that day. Those are his words. He told me that. And he felt like it really should have been in that report, and it could have been explained in a way that didn't, or at least tried not to offend conservative Christians, but to simply leave it out entirely. That gives America an incomplete picture of what happened.
Yeah, I think it does, and it doesn't serve anyone to be dishonest about that, or not to be honest. I guess maybe the better way is just not to be honest about it, and not to be transparent and get the full information there. And it's weird because so many of us, we make decisions. We never make a decision in a vacuum, right? We're always dealing with our context and the people that we're going to disappoint, and the people we're going to make happy, the consequences that are going to come to us from this decision, from saying this, and of course, all of that is amplified when you're in a public position, and it's really tough. And thinking about the people that influence politicians, obviously this doesn't happen in a vacuum. And you talk about three groups, and I'd love for you to kind of outline here. You talk about three groups: rad trads, reconstructionists, theobros, and the New Apostolic Reformation.
Yep.
We've talked a little bit about the New Apostolic Reformation, but could you help understand? And I think that chapter is Three Roads to Theocracy.
Yes.
So what are these roads? What's theocracy? People listening probably understand it, but help understand, what is the theocracy? What would that look like? And what are these groups? What do they do?
Yeah.
And kind of maybe a brief sense of who they are.
Yeah, thanks. Josh, I think it's important to go into the theology. Now, I don't pretend to be a theologian, but what I do in that chapter is I try to unpack the religious belief system of these three dominant factions of MAGA Christian nationalism, because I think you have to accept that this is not just a political movement. There are genuine religious beliefs driving many of these folks. And so we should look into that. We should follow the theology a little bit. And I do that by using the advice and the good work of folks like Matthew Taylor and Bradley Onishi and Julie Ingersoll and other actual religious scholars who've studied this movement very closely. So you mentioned, we've talked about NAR and that faction. That is by far the biggest and most powerful and most dangerous part of the three-legged stool. The other two, the rad trads and the theobros, are, I believe, very dangerous. What they all have in common is a supremacist ideology, basically a Christian supremacy, various forms of dominion theology, where you don't really accept pluralism. This is not about coexistence in these belief systems. It is about using the power of government to impose your religious beliefs on everyone else. And it can be quite extreme. So in the case of the Theobros, you have folks like Doug Wilson, who is probably well known to you and your listeners, who believes that only Christians should have public office. And that, I guess you're going to have to remove Article 6 from the Constitution if you're going to still have a Constitution in Doug Wilson's America, because it says there is no religious test. They would go further, many of these Theobros, and say it would only be Protestant Christians. So it's a very narrow and absolutist view. Of course, they want to get rid of the 19th Amendment. They think that women having the right to vote was a mistake, and there should be male headship, and men should vote on behalf of the entire family. So not only do they want to dramatically change our form of government into something that would be a theocracy or a theonomy, as Doug Wilson would say, they want to start stripping away many of the basic rights that we all count on. The rad trads are a little bit different. Their version of dominion is Catholic integralism, the belief that Catholic moral teaching really should be reflected in government, kind of going back to the early days of the Holy Roman Empire when it worked that way. The papacy had a lot of control over the dictatorship, and Franco's Spain is another model that they often hold up, where the Catholic moral teaching is kind of part and parcel of an authoritarian. These folks are very authoritarian government. And you can recognize some of the prominent Christian nationalist power players in these different places on the spectrum. So when you think about the Theo Bros, Pete Hegseth is a pretty good example of that. He is a member of that denomination. When you think about the Rad Trads, Nick Fuentes is about as glaring an example as you will find, like a modern day Father Coughlin, who was the proto Rad Trad, really, in many ways, preaching to 20 million or more people every week on his radio broadcast in the 1930s, openly supporting Hitler, denouncing democracy, very bigoted, anti-Semitic, racist. So you will see elements of all of that in those subcultures as well.
I think one thing that the public probably doesn't know, especially when it comes to the Theo Bros, is that they already have a foothold in the government, in the sense that folks, I think, like you mentioned, Doug Wilson was giving sermons at DOD. I'm still calling it DOD at the Pentagon, right? And Brian Kaler's been doing some really, really fascinating work on this. So are any of the other groups that you're talking about, like, do you see the sort of, I don't know, like move into government that's actually having an influence on like policy and what have you?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, look, Catholics have always punched way above their weight on the Supreme Court and in places like the Heritage Society. And so, they're not all necessarily rad trads, which, is sort of the violent, explicitly anti-democratic group that I'm concerned about. But they're pretty sympathetic and, sort of rad trad adjacent, many of these extremists. When we kind of go back to the charismatic evangelical wing, the NAR folks, definitely a huge presence in the United States Congress. Mike Johnson, 2 heartbeats away from the presidency, is super close to this group. Calls people like Jim Garlow a profound influence on his life. Has started this sort of flagship Christian nationalist event every year at the Museum of the Bible called the National Day of Prayer and Repentance, where dozens of Republicans from the House and Senate go over to the Museum of the Bible and do an altar call with NAR prophets and apostles, and apologize for our national sins of liberalism and secularism and abortion and things like that. So yeah, absolutely, they have gained ground and traction. Many of these fringe actors have been normalized and platformed at the highest level of government in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago.
Yeah, it really does feel like it's been at breakneck pace. See, from especially like the first Trump administration, right? It went through that. Of course, we had what happened at January 6th, but it does feel like, it just took off on January 6th. And then this new administration with it's so in your face.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable that people are even accepting it, to be honest with you. Like, it's so in your face. It's like,
there's no subtlety here.
No, none, zero. It doesn't seem. I haven't heard Trump or Hegseth say we're making the Bible like the law of the land. But and I'm not saying they haven't said things similar to that, or other people aren't. Like, it's my point with that is, like, they're not being that subtle. Like, that would be very explicit, but they don't even need to do that. It's so clear from all the patterns and the pathways that they're taking in the way that the agencies are posting these things that have never been done before. This is so clear, the propaganda that's in this. And I'm like, I can't even believe people are falling for it. It makes me it makes me just sad. And it makes me like, angry. Like, are we that dumb? Like, are we that? And I don't think it's that we're that dumb. It's that we just want people to tell us what we want to hear. I think it's that we're that biased and that we're that afraid. I'll pause there and hear any reflections you have on that. I have a question about the founding. They're kind of the mythology of the founding.
That's a fun subject too. But to your point just now, Josh, I think most of us have just been a little bit too passive and deferential while this very overt push of Christian nationalist theocracy marches forward in an aggressive way. When you look at what they did with America 250, this thing that should have been this broadly unifying celebration of our 250th anniversary, and they turned it
Unifying at all.
nothing. They made it so partisan, so political, so divisive. The PragerU uh, curriculum that was, seen in these freedom trucks running around the country, lying about our founding, disparaging the Muslim faith, the basically the revival that they staged on the National Mall with taxpayer dollars, a very sectarian Christian revival. They are just blasting through what Jefferson called the wall of separation that's supposed to exist between church and state. And I give you in the book a lot of their own words where, you may say they Trump and Hegseth haven't come right out and said that the Bible should be the supreme law in this country. They have all but said it. And, Mike Johnson has said it. He said he wants a biblically sanctioned government, that the Bible is the operating manual for people in government. These are getting right up to that line of, frankly, the Bible being sort of a law that sits over and above the Constitution itself.
Yeah, and it's like coming from someone, me, like that. I've tried to. I'm not like the expert on all things biblical or anything like that, but I've definitely tried to understand the Bible as best as I can, and understand it in context as best as I can. It's in its ancient context, and the idea that we're going to take these laws and bring them, it's so absurd to someone who understands even ancient law and the purpose of ancient law. It's so absurd as to be laughable, and yet it's not laughable because people are trying to do it. So essentially, what it is again, it's taking this and then making our own whatever we want out of it, and saying, hey, look, the Bible says this, therefore we're going to expand that in all sorts of different directions, and which may have nothing to do with what the Bible said. Actually, I can almost promise you it doesn't in most cases. The government has not been very good at exegeting the text. I'll just tell you that from what I've seen. So, Jared, you guys got to stop trying to exegete the Bible. You're doing a terrible job at it. So please don't do that anymore. Anyway, but when I'm thinking about I want to move to this idea of the mythology that's behind the founding, because that's a big deal that you make in your book. And basically, hey, like this is strategically used by these movements. It's actually essential for them, because if they don't have this founding myth, the whole agenda falls apart.
Exactly.
That's kind of the sense I'm getting. Could you
explain
that, help people understand what's going on there?
So these founding myths of America being founded as a Christian nation, that Christians were always intended to be privileged, that our founders were all these sort of devout proto-evangelicals who wanted to bring faith into government. This is the battering ram that they're going to take against church-state separation. And they just make so much of this up out of whole cloth. David Barton is, probably the most prolific of the fake historians, has written a book that completely distorts Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson's probably their biggest challenge here, because any understanding of our founding intent with respect to religious freedom and separation of church and state runs right through Thomas Jefferson. And any serious historian knows that Thomas Jefferson was deeply skeptical of organized religion and religious orthodoxy. He disparaged the clerics of his day for their priestcraft, which he thought was always fundamentally at odds with liberty and with science and other things. He famously took a razor to the Bible and excised out the supernatural parts of Jesus Christ's teaching in the New Testament, which he just didn't believe. He didn't believe in an intercessory God. He believed in some force, probably a God that created everything and then went away. He was a deist and a rationalist and a skeptic. He wrote in a letter to John Adams that removing the miracles from the Bible with his razor was as easy as taking out diamonds from a dunghill. I don't mean to be too provocative to my friends of faith here, but if we
Good.
if we want to understand who Thomas Jefferson was, that's who he was. He is not this proto-evangelical. But man, does David Barton try his best to sort of replace the actual Thomas Jefferson with that. And they do it in a bunch of other ways, suggesting that the Declaration of Independence and the Bible are just wonderfully aligned and consistent. They're really not. They're quite different. The Constitution, of course, is entirely secular. So they've just developed this entire mythology to sort of work around all of those awkward facts and paint a picture of the United States as the new covenant nation that was always intended to be, God's chosen people, Christians.
I should note to the audience that if you're looking for a great book to read, Warren Throckmorton's book, Christian Past That Wasn't, is a great one. And he's also one of the only researchers that got David Barton's book unpublished. I think it's that book on Jefferson, as a matter of fact. So we just recently did a whole episode just fact checking David Barton. It was really fun. We had pictures and everything. It was really cool. But yeah, I'm curious. This is probably a question you get a lot, and I feel like this is an unanswerable question. But the three groups you defined earlier, the NAR, Theobros, and whatnot, and maybe just the larger white evangelical Christian community, all seem to coalesce around Trump. Now, recent polling shows there may be some fracturing there, but if you look at any PRI survey, or whatever, like they are coming out in force to vote for Trump. Like, what's the appeal in your mind? Like, why did Christians choose this, person that seems to not represent any of their views whatsoever?
Well, I'm gonna try not to be too sarcastic about it, but the answer that immediately jumps to mind is God works in mysterious ways, and at the end of the day, that kind of is the explanation, right? You all know characters like Lance Wallnau at the NAR, one of the big power players in this Christian nationalist movement. Well, he and Paula White and a few others were pretty central to Donald Trump winning the Republican nomination in 2016. Trump placed a big bet on this group because they were ascendant in right-wing Christianity. All the other churches were shrinking. Denominations were, evaporating. And yet these independent network charismatics were growing through these decentralized ministries. And Trump figured that out. And Paula White, I think, probably helped him figure that out. And, as others have explained, Matt Taylor and others, in the wake of the Obergefell decision, legalizing marriage equality, these right-wing Christians just felt devastated. It was a low point for them. And they determined that business as usual wasn't going to cut it in the 2016 presidential race. They needed something different. They needed a bully. And they decided it was Donald Trump. And so Lance Wallnau and others issued this prophecy that Trump is the modern day King Cyrus. The Cyrus being, of course, the very flawed pagan that God chose to deliver the Jews from Persia. And this Cyrus anointing prophecy really went viral in evangelical circles. Lance Wallnau, kind of merchandised it. He started selling gold coins that had Donald Trump's head with King Cyrus's head. And you began to just see this thing catch fire. And, look, from the outside, someone like me looks at that and just can't believe people bought into it. But when you think about how much power and influence these prophetic faith leaders have over millions and millions of their followers, when they validate something like that, there's going to be buy-in. There's going to be traction. And so I believe it's a huge part of how Trump kind of solidified this partnership with the most extreme branch of right-wing Christianity. and also how he won the presidency. Once he survived a couple of assassination attempts, this thing really took on a religious aura. And I believe it also answers the question of why today, after everything we've seen from this guy, after all of the lies and grift and betrayals, right-wing evangelical Christians are still so devoted to him. It's because of this. It's because for them, he is a religious figure with prophetic destiny.
I'm curious. This is more of a personal question, but like when you tell that story, especially like the King Cyrus thing and the Lance Wallnau, like, do you still get the weird side eyes from people? Because
Yeah.
like, even today, like when I try to explain to people like what's going on, the things we talk about, like, and they're just like, is Faithful Politics one of those weird like tabloid shows? And I'm like, no, like this is actually what's happening. So like, do you get weird responses when you tell the King Cyrus thing?
People are shocked when they hear that because it sounds too weird to believe. And so I actually, in the book, use their own words. I show them the picture of Lance Wallnau on TV hawking these Trump Cyrus coins for like $55. It's real. I mean, this has become a thing, a big time thing within that variant of right wing Christianity.
Yeah, I want to move to, I mean, all of this, I say that with that tone because of how they're just heavy. It all is. And then the idea like that, man, they have this plan, they have this agenda, including the anti-Christian task force or anti-Christian bias task force. They have all these things like they're doing, and they're setting up this narrative, of hey, this is why we have to do this, because Christians are so persecuted and they're so
Right.
worked against, that we have to take the bull by the horns, because look, we're going to be nice, we can't trust anyone else to be nice. I'm saying from their perspective, we're going to do what's right, we can't trust anyone else to do what's right, so we're going to twist the rules, we're going to, whatever we got to do, let's do it, because we're under threat, right? And the idea of threat and the idea of how this threat and the fear, the way that fear is used, I want to get your insights on how this is used in terms of Christian Zionism.
Yeah.
This is a huge part. It's a part of your book. It's a part of the overall structure, right? That Jerusalem is in Israel such that it looms large, right?
Yeah.
In the view of evangelicals and in a view of evangelicals in America,
Yeah.
not just evangelicals, right? But there's a large contingent there. I've even had people, say to me that they, they wanted to, their hope that they're Jewish, that they, that they're blessed, like different Christians say this to me. And in my opinion, it's a very bad theology. But it's driving decisions and driving votes. The idea that Israel is God's chosen people and that to be aligned with them is to be aligned with God is driving votes. And I would love for you to share with the audience what you discovered about that and what role Christian Zionism plays in this. Maybe you can define it for us briefly, and then what role it plays.
Yeah, you bet. I struggled with whether to write about Israel and Christian Zionism because I just know that, the whole subject matter of my book is the third rail for some people. But now you get into Israel, you are really going there. So I did struggle with it. At the end of the day, I determined that I can't really tell the story of my concern and sound the alarm if I'm not talking about this, because it's a huge part of evangelical Christianity today. And how it got there, I think, is fascinating. So Christian Zionism is this belief system that the modern day state of Israel is the fulfillment of biblical prophecy in a very exciting way that heralds the coming end times and the second coming of Christ. And it sort of was a fringe theology for many, many years. It was developed in the late 19th century by some theologians, but didn't really gain traction until the 1970s and 1980s when a guy wrote a book called The Late Great Planet Earth. You guys are probably too young to remember that book, but I read it as a kid when I was
I
a
remember
devout.
it.
You
I
remember
remember
it?
hearing about it. I didn't read it, but I do remember hearing about it. I'm 40, so I remember hearing about it in church growing up and stuff.
Right.
Yes.
So
Hal
this was
Lindsey or whatever.
Hal Lindsey, exactly. Yeah, this was at the peak of Cold War angst. We were all scared that, nuclear annihilation was just around the corner. And so Hal Lindsey took this Christian Zionist kind of paradigm and started pattern matching all the developments in Europe and modern day headlines and interpreting how they proved up different prophecies from the book of Revelations and the book of Matthew and other parts of the Bible. And he built this really spooky story that made you think the end times are really here and now. And the calamity is going to happen, and then Jesus is going to come back. We're really close to this glorious end of days. In fact, he predicted it would happen in 1988, which was obviously a pretty big prophetic flop. But man, that book sold millions and millions of copies, and Christian Zionism started to gain traction within evangelical circles and become part of the mainstream belief system. It really took off in the 90s, though, and you guys are old enough, young enough to remember the Left Behind series of novels, which built on this same Christian Zionist just kind of plot line. And that one, it was the success of those books, which sold tens of millions of copies, that led to Christian Zionism as we know it today. The group CUFI, Christians United for Israel, which is way bigger than AIPAC, and one could argue a bigger power player when it comes to Israel in Republican politics, sprang up in the 1990s right as those Left Behind books were hitting their peak sales. And so, it's just kind of interesting that from these books and pulp fiction, basically, you have an entire belief system that was mainstreamed and is now embraced by most evangelical Christians today. I guess the part that alarms me more than that is the way it's penetrated our government and our policy, because you have people in senior positions in the State Department who are ambassadors, Mike Johnson, so many other Christian nationalist power players articulate their view of our policy toward Israel and the Middle East straight out of Christian Zionist beliefs and the Bible. And I think that's a problem for church-state separation. It's certainly a problem for anyone who rejects the theology, the flawed theology, as you mentioned, Josh, of Christian Zionism. And it's an interesting fault line within conservative Christianity, too, because the other subcultures of conservative Christianity do not subscribe to Christian Zionism. Some of them are openly anti-Semitic and kind of ambivalent about Israel. So there's all of this going on, and I had to write about it. So I do try to unpack that a little bit in the book. I also talk about how no one should confuse this strident absolutist support for Israel among Christian Zionists with actual love of Israel as a Jewish homeland or love of Jews, because there's a catch here. Jews are seen as useful to Christian Zionists because they are instruments to bring about the second coming. And at that point, everybody's got to convert to Christianity, and there will be a Christian kingdom in Israel. So that's a little bit of a dilemma for Jews and for anyone in Israel that thinks that they get to continue having self-determination.
Wow. So my last question for you, and this question comes as from the place as a Democrat, as a Christian, and as an American. Most of the people I speak with in my progressive circles are really upset at the Democrats. I get it. You guys aren't in power. I get it. But there's a really big chance Democrats will be in power in like 77 days or what have you, at least in the House. What's the response? I mean, how do we, better understand sort of the Christian nationalism that we are seeing within our American government? And then how do we, how do you thread that needle in a way where, like, to Liz Cheney's concerns, like she was concerned about conservative Christians, Josh is a conservative Christian, so like, how do you sort of, disassociate the religion that's in our government today without disaffecting the religious?
Here's my concern, Will. Obviously, I'm writing this book because I believe that MAGA Christian nationalism is a dangerous threat to democracy. I don't know any Democrats that embrace that type of Christian nationalism. They may be out there, but I just am unaware of any. So I can tell you that I think Democrats will not push this agenda, and that, electing Democrats to Congress, which I hope happens in 77 days, will be an improvement in that regard, because the agenda will no longer have people actively working in big ways and small ways to advance it. But I am also concerned about my fellow Democrats, because I think even when we do take the majority, we're not very good at talking about this stuff. And I worry that we will not have the spine, frankly, the political will and the courage to actually confront this the way we need to. A few Democrats are getting better at it. I mean, you see James Tallarico going there and taking Christian nationalism on head on in a way that's very articulate, that comes from a place of faith. So that means he can't be attacked and dismissed as anti-Christian. And he does it in a way that makes me feel comfortable as a humanist. He's not trying to impose theocracy. He's speaking to everybody. So I like that, but there's very few messengers in the Democratic Party like that. And there's a lot of other folks who just don't want to touch this. So, one of the takeaways from my book is we've got to start creating more political pressure on Democrats to step up and find their voice on this. It shouldn't be that controversial to defend church-state separation. Lots of Christians are starting to do that in a really hopeful way. Democrats in politics are not yet. And so, I hope that people will urge their representative, whoever they may be, to be more outspoken on this. I hope they will urge them to join our Freethought Caucus, which is really the main place where we are trying to defend church-state separation, and we've got people of all faith perspectives in the Freethought Caucus. And I hope that we will try to build a broad interfaith coalition. I'm happy to work with Josh as a conservative Christian in defense of our shared values, and we've got lots of them. The biggest being, we want to keep living in a democracy where we can continue to have conversations about our differences over maybe some social issues and things like that. You don't get to have those conversations if you're not in a democracy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm a Christian. I would love it. I feel like, like Paul, when he was before a council in the book of Acts, and he was before a Jewish king I think it was Festus. It was one of the Roman, rulers, governors. And he said, I hope everyone would know Jesus except for these chains. And he's being interrogated or, given his defense in court. And I feel that, not that this is court, I'm giving my defense, but I want everyone, my prayer and hope is that everyone would know Jesus, or at least know someone who knows Jesus that's loving, that's caring, and that's going to act like Jesus. But I do know very fundamentally from my faith that Yahweh, that's the God and the name of God in the Old Testament, or the Hebrew scriptures, of Yahweh treats people a certain way, and then Yahweh was embodied with Jesus. Why would I treat people differently? And part of what Yahweh does is he gives people a choice. They don't have to worship him. They don't have to believe it. He gives them a choice. And when we don't give people choices, we look a lot more like Pharaoh than we do like Yahweh. I think that part of that Christianity, my faith and Will's faith, has the tools, and a lot of people's faith that has the tools to combat this, if people will if they'll recognize it and if they'll look for it and they'll understand it. And that's my prayer. How can people, and I'm just so thankful for you, Jared, Congressman, that you're doing this. And I am in the fight with you because we want a place where people can worship the God or not the God they choose. And I get that that upsets people, but if Yahweh is giving that choice, then what makes us think we shouldn't or can't? It just seems so silly to me. So we want people to have the freedom to choose in their lives what they worship and how they live. And how can I want to let you respond to that, and then kind of give people where they can go to connect with you, the Freethought Caucus, get the book, things like that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Josh. I really appreciate what you just said, and really appreciate both of you for having these great conversations, having me back on your show a couple times. I've always felt, really welcomed, and it's been a great conversation. My book is out. It is No Prophets: The Fight to Save Democracy from Christian Nationalism. It's unlike a lot of other books that you see on this subject because I am the first politician at the national level dumb enough to wade into this subject matter. And I do that because I've got a little bit of acquired immunity against the backlash that comes with it. As the only humanist in Congress, they've already called me demon and antichrist and every other name in the book. So there's not much more they can do. So I go there, I take readers behind the scenes in really interesting and I think surprising ways. And I wrap up kind of the way you wrap up, Josh, which is we gotta work with each other. We've got to cross denominational lines, religious belief lines. We got to focus on the thing that is most important, which right now in this moment is saving our democracy, because it is in real trouble. This project is so much further along than most people understand, and I try to pull back the curtain on a lot of that in this book. So please get it if you can. Tell folks about it. It's available everywhere. And then I'll be doing a book tour. I started last night in San Francisco with Bradley Onishi, who is well known to you guys, a great religion scholar. I will be in Los Angeles tomorrow night with Bill Nye, the science guy, as my moderator. So it's a very different.
Bill. How can I forget Bill Nye, the science?
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about, another sort of aspect of Christian nationalism. We've been talking about the way it threatens our form of government and our rights. Well, it also threatens our future, by attacking science and higher education and learning and things that, in today's age, gosh, if we're going to survive the next pandemic, if we're going to have cures for cancer, if we're going to meet the moment with the climate crisis, we cannot be tearing down those institutions. So Bill Nye is a pretty good partner for that conversation. Then I'll be off to Boston, where I'll be in conversation with Bill McKibben, who is like one of my environmental heroes. People know him as founder of 350.org and other environmental movements, but he's also a Methodist Sunday school teacher who has written about Christian nationalism. He's an interesting guy. You guys may want to have him on your show. But just a bunch of other events and platforms like that all over the country. I'll be going to Kansas City, Missouri, actually my hometown of independence, with Reverend Emmanuel Cleaver. And the church that I grew up in, which is now called the Community of Christ, is hosting me in its world headquarters, in its auditorium. So I'm really excited about that and about many other stops on the book tour.
Well, we just can't thank you enough, Congressman, for coming on and spending some time with us.
Thank you.
Really, it's a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. To our viewers, guys, we're going to put the links in the description so you can go check that out, get the book, get involved, share this with someone who needs to hear it. This is real. We are trying to get word out there so that we can make decisions accordingly. Don't just listen to what people tell you. Don't even listen to what we tell you. Go look it up, try to figure it out, have conversations about it. Refuse to just have easy answers. Look for evidence. And I think you'll be better for it. And guys, until next time, keep your conversations not right or left, but up.